for those who are watching online or going to watch this later and who are here, we came to the board earlier in the school year. It's a group of about 25 school districts from around the state that is partnering with our Department of Education. So you just saw the accreditation system, the state test that they have, but our State Department is also recognizing that there are different ways to do it, and school districts that have been engaging their community and thinking differently about the student experience and having assessments that are meaningful for the kid, for the teacher, and for the parent during that school year time, instead of waiting till the end of the year, taking a test and getting the results sometime that next fall of that next grade level of the school year. So we've been doing work. And so I'm gonna give you just a quick history of the Success Ready group, and part of this work is what we call a waiver, and Tara's going to get into the details of the waiver, but I'm just going to kind of give the audience and people watching on YouTube and the board just kind of a global overview of the history of this work, the Success Ready Network. In locally, Parkway is in this, Ladue is in this, Melville, Afton, Pattonville, Rittner are in this group with us locally. So it's a diverse group of schools that are designing this system. So next slide. So talked about this earlier with our listening and learning. We started engaging our community about thinking differently about the student experience. We developed our Lindbergh life success skills during that time to help us develop a well-rounded approach to educating our kids. We also joined the Success Ready group, and we basically, before we became a member or the group got in, there was a focus group and a study group, and that was during the 21-22 school year. And we were fortunate enough to have a voice into that focus group that presented to the State Board of Education about creating this network. And we had a district facilitation member from our teaching and learning team that was a member of that study group. And then we also had a parent, somebody that was organizing this work reached out to us and said, we hear you guys are having these kinds of conversations we're talking about. Is there a parent? We took a parent from our teaching and learning board advisory, and they were a part of that focus group, basically coming up with what would this network look like that they presented to the State Board of Education. So next slide. So that's kind of our journey. We talked about that. Go ahead and go to the earlier. So again, these are the 12 success measures that we asked our community to rank that goes right along with our work in the Success Ready network. Next slide. And then again, these are the 5 success measures that we have that tie directly to the work of the Success Ready group. Next slide. And then this is kind of a journey in the state of Missouri, and I think it started about 10 years ago with Mike Fulton, and when he was the superintendent in Pattonville, and then there were some other districts, like there was a couple in Kansas City, and it was around when there became legislation to allow school districts to innovate, to think differently about the student experience and what that can look like, having academic measures, but really also focusing on things like industry recognized credentials. Can we get so much college credit for certain students? Work experience kinds of things, internships. So providing that as a way of accountability as well. And so that work started about 10 years ago. And then when we looked at the Missouri MOAP, that's the one that started. We joined it in my first year, right, 18-19, but it was already going prior to me getting here. And this was them looking at assessments that measure growth. Example, our NWEA, iReady. Those are examples of what we call through assessments that Tara will talk about coming up. So this kind of just breaks down. This is the Senate bill from the spring that says basically that we need to be, supporting high school to get people college, career, and workplace ready for every student. So again, also has legislative support to be doing this work as well in our Success Ready network. So talked about the commission and the task force that presented to the college board last June. The task force really thought when they presented to the state board last year that they would say, that's good, let's do another year of work and then let's fine tune it. They were so excited from the task force. They said, go find that group of school districts and create your network. Come back to us in a year with potentially a waiver that would allow us to do different types of assessments and different kinds of accountability with our students in developing this, not just for us, but for the entire state as a model. So there's 25 districts that are working on this, again, with partnership with DESE. Next slide. And then this kind of just lays out the whole timeline for the work in the state of Missouri, so you can kind of look at that. It was the proficiency-based. Again, proficiency-based is standards-based, so we use the term standards-based in our district. They use the word proficiency-based. You know, this year we rolled out the standards-based grading at our elementary level, and then that kind of just walks through the timeline that's kind of led us to this network. And so that's kind of the history. So this isn't something new. This isn't something random. This is a snapshot of the conversation in the state of Missouri. Also, the last 5 years, our conversation around this type of work. And so I think it just kind of lays out that this isn't something that, oh, last year we decided to do this. This has been work and talk that's been going on in our state for quite some time. And so we're kind of at that point where we're ready to put the rubber to the road and do some work and some planning, and we're super excited about that. And Tara, I think the next slide is you, that you're going to jump in and kind of talk about the waiver and what we're going to ask you in April to vote on, to say, yes, we want to go forward with this waiver and present it with a group of other school districts from around the state to the State Board of Education in June. So there you go, Tara. Any questions for me? All right, thank you.
I think this slide really demonstrates the scope of the impact of who is a part of the Success Ready Students Network. You can see it's 56 Missouri public and charter school member districts. It represents 10% of the districts, but 34% of the students in the state of Missouri. So in terms of volume of impact and really having some teeth in order to make a change for the future of what education looks like in the state of Missouri, there is significant involvement here. So as Dr. Lake referenced already, we are a part of the system design zone. That means we are at the front end of designing this work. We are one of 25 districts who are in that category, and then there's another 31 districts who are doing the learning and the innovations to prepare themselves to be able to move forward. What's really noteworthy about this as well is that we're partnering with universities, with regional organizations, and just today the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education newsletter referenced this work and how this work is influencing the future of MSIP. So MSIP 7 will be based on the work that comes out of the Success Ready Students Network. So a lot of momentum behind this. Next slide, please. And this just kind of shows demographically where the populations are coming from. So Dr. Lake referenced the 6 districts within our region, but you can see that the districts are also inclusive of Kansas City, Southwest Missouri, Northeast Missouri, and Southeast Missouri, as well as Central Missouri. So again, all different types of districts who are involved in this work, urban, suburban, rural, which is significant because when we're touching all parts of the state, we're touching all types of needs and diversity. And so when we go to the next slide, you can just kind of see what's at the heart of this work. Students really are at the heart of the work in identifying what knowledge, what skills, and what dispositions do they need to have in order to be successful for life beyond school. That means we have work to do as a network to redesign assessment systems, support innovation, engage and partner with the real world with business collaborations, and then in the end, we'll implement policy changes because that's going to be what makes this happen universally across the state. So when we go to the next slide, Missouri's competency-based definition, this is what Dr. Lake was referencing earlier. We call this standards-based learning. And whether you call it competency-based learning or standards-based learning, the concept is the same. It's that you are getting at the root of what students need in order to move forward in their own learning journey and to ensure that they are getting those skills, that knowledge, and they have the dispositions to be successful for what comes next. So when we look through this, this is the work of our district. So when we talk about students being empowered daily, that's student agency, giving voice and choice to our students. Assessment being meaningful, that is our NWEA assessments where it has immediate impact on what's happening in the classroom. Those are classroom assessments that influence what teachers do next to support students. that timely differentiated support that comes as a result of having good assessments. I could go through each of these individual bullet items and point out how they align to our work, but this is the work of our district and the work that we have been doing. So it's a very good marriage as we go forward with the work of the Success Ready Students Network. Next slide, please. So, at the heart of all of this, we have to start with assessment, because if we don't know what students know and can do, we can't influence what happens next. So again, I feel like I'm reiterating, is our assessment meaningful? Is it an accurate reflection of what students can do? Is it actionable for teachers? We know we can turn around and use that data to support learning for students because it's informing instruction. And it then drills down specifically to what are the individual needs of a student, and then how do we communicate that with families? That's the goal of a really good assessment system. When we go to the next slide, it's really clear that the MAP test does not offer this for us. It is not meaningful. Students take the test in the spring, reports come out in the fall. There's no immediacy there. It is a one-time, we often refer to it as an autopsy. Teachers don't have any relevant data that they can use to inform instruction and to support student learning as a result of it. It's definitely not personalized. So the work of the Success Ready Students Network is we have to change our assessment system in order to change our programming in support of individual students and have a really strong standards-based or competency-based learning environment. Next slide, please. So again, the work that we want to do, we really want to focus on assessment for learning. Where are students? Where are we going with them? How do we help them get there? By having a good assessment, we can do all of these things where we are providing timely, differentiated support for students, helping them to set goals, monitoring their progress toward those goals, making informed decisions about what comes next instructionally for students. Next slide, please. So that takes us to what is fondly called the demonstration project. We are demonstrating to the state that we can do something different, which means in order to do something different, we have to ask for some exceptions to the current way of doing business as a state. So that's where the waiver comes from. So we are looking at partnering with DESE to propose this spring that starting next school year, we would have some exemptions to some of the state requirements. And I'm going to go through each of those requirements pretty quickly here, and then as Dr. Lake referenced, these will come up again in April for approval as to whether or not we are going forward to be a part of this waiver. So if you go to the next slide, you can see the first commitment. So as a district, we are looking to make commitments that we will focus on growth to standard assessments. That is essentially what we do with our NWEA assessments. We know what the standards are. We are looking at to students growing towards those assessments. So that is the way we would measure students. As we go to commitment number 2, you can see that it would require that we participate with DESE in a federal waiver request. So right now, the State Board of Education has determined that the MAP test is what we will do to meet federal requirements for assessment. So we would have to go forward and do a waiver in order to do a different model, to use our model for our assessment accountability. So that would require a waiver from federal assessments. Next slide. Using formative end of course and market value assets. We don't talk a lot about market value assets. We talk about Diploma Plus. It is the same thing. So you'll start to hear these words used interchangeably. But it's this idea that we can identify other avenues of student success outside of a traditional assessment process. So when we're looking at opportunities for our kids to do internships, which we know, when we're looking at college credit, what we do through our dual credit, through our early college programs. So programs that we already have in place that are an additional asset to students that are beyond the traditional school experience. So how we can use some of those measurement tools in order to demonstrate that students are really ready for success beyond the school environment. So we go to the next slide. This gets into working with the state on what that accountability system would look like. How do we capture that data that we're collecting from our own assessments and from our own college career readiness market value assets in order to build an accountability system? We'd be committed to participating in that. And I really want to highlight the italics component that's at the bottom of this slide, and it was on a few previous slides. In doing this waiver, we are asking for exceptions to be made from part of MSIP 6, not all of MSIP 6. There are components of MSIP 6 that are really strong. We've even talked about some of the data and some of the processes that we've done as a district have been improved because of MSIP 6. So this just gives us some flexibility in what some of those accountability measures would be with regard to MSIP 6. And you can see that that's still under development. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to determine what that would be. As we go to the next slide, we start to get more into the ways that we can be creative with the student experiences. So how do we create opportunities for students to learn at a pace that is appropriate for them? How do we look at attendance differently? Right now, we do a lot of measurement of student success based on attendance. How much time were you sitting in a seat? How much time did you spend in that course? Well, for students who may be able to move more quickly through instruction, we'd have some flexibility to look at that differently. This is probably one of the longer hauls of this work, designing these types of systems, and there's a lot of conversation and a lot of professional learning about it, but this is a really amazing opportunity for our students and for our system overall. The next slide. Engaging in formal research design. So there is a lot of research. Like, we have to connect the data of our NWEA assessments to our student readiness. So working with various partners to really dig in on the research and to use that to guide that the outcomes that we want for students are really what's happening from what we plan. So there is an evaluation component of this. And then I believe the final commitment is that we are committed to ongoing professional learning. We've been doing a lot of professional learning through this process already, but it has been pretty limited to our central office staff, so we have the opportunity to continue to expand that professional learning beyond us. We are moving into our instructional coaches participating in some of this professional learning this summer. We'll start to expand beyond that, but there are lots of opportunities that we've already been able to engage in with very well vetted academic partners in order to start this conversation, and it will be anticipated as part of continuing the conversation. Next slide, please, Colin. So here's our timeline. Obviously, we talked about this in our January board workshop, the work we've been doing with the Success Ready Students Network. We've met with faculty. We've talked with each faculty, our parent leadership group. We're going to expand this to our parent leadership group again and go deeper on these specific commitments now that these have been drafted out and kind of in a final stage. We are also going to work with our board advisories. We're having a special session after spring break with board advisories to get feedback around this work and this waiver specifically, so that in April, we have additional feedback to bring this to you for vote on whether or not as a district we are moving forward to be a part of this waiver that would go to the State Board of Education in June for approval.
And I think it's important that March meeting just isn't board advisories. It's my student advisories invited. We've invited the Chamber of Commerce. We've invited business. So it is a community, but there is our board advisories there. But this is a community engagement that says, here's our work. And during my listening and learning, we introduced to all of those groups that we were a part of this network. And so it's really just providing them an update on the work and where we are.
And then assuming that the State Board of Education approves this in June, that means that the waiver would go into effect for next year. And so we would be participating in a pilot where we are using our own assessment data for developing an accountability system. And then ultimately, that would inform what the state does for the next iteration of MSIP, which would be MSIP 7. Next slide, please. Again, this work is not happening in a vacuum. It is connected to the governor's priorities around workforce and education. It has come about because of bipartisan legislative support. Our Missouri State Board of Education is involved. Our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is involved, and we are not at the forefront of this work. This has already been happening across the nation in various states. So we have models that we can look to as we continue to develop it. And as we look at the last slide, it's really already connected to what we do. These are the dispositions and skills we want our students to have as they go out into the world after graduating Lindbergh High School or Lindbergh students. So continuing to grow this work and develop this work is really our focus. Any questions or comments?
Do all 56 schools that are participating do the same thing, or is it individual for each school?
So right now, there are still questions. So there are, for us, we are doing NWEA as our assessment. There are other districts that are using Renaissance or iReady. So we are going under the assumption right now that we are individually going to be able to utilize our own assessments. We have not gotten feedback from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that they're going to limit that. But our expectation would be that we can use our own systems in order to create this.
And I would say this, the 75% of the 25 that would be a part of this use NWA as their assessment.
And I think it's noteworthy that that's really an expectation of ours, to switch, to pivot, as someone likes to say, to another assessment system
Hey,
in a
don't make
short
fun.
period of time would not behoove our students.
I was just going to say thank you. I know that the people in Matt and I's district think that Lindbergh has their stuff together, and the fact that it's matching even this last little graphic here and everything that's happening there is awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.